Hello, and welcome to this very sunny January webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about reasons to rebuild your website in 2025. Brief background on Codehouse. We've been around since 2007, so coming up to almost 20 years serving the digital community, building websites for many large organizations from APM Terminals, subsidiary of Maersk, where we've helped 1 million containers be tracked and then also be picked up by trucks, as well as helping Clarion, the UK's largest housing association, move their Trustpilot rating from 1.4 to 4.2 through a transformation of their digital services, as well as, if you are a fan of Katsu curries, helping their customers pick up curries and other delightful and delicious treats from restaurants around the world. We've got a presence in London, Sydney, Colombo, and New York, serving organizations across those continents. Our service ranges from the beginning, when you've got the kind of early questions about what should we be doing, to researching and understanding what the customer needs are, what's been working well on our site with analytics, through to designing new solutions and delivering all of that into a live production environment, tracking it and making sure it's all working, and then keeping going and doing more of that. The general framework of how we think about helping our clients, which is talking about the modern enterprise and helping customers transition, all those companies that we mentioned before, thinking about that transition and a target to getting into becoming a modern enterprise from a digital perspective to serve those digital experiences. We live in a world where those digital touch points have to be served by integrated systems. We think about the top being that compatible platform. There isn't one specific tool that fits into any of those boxes. But what we like to do and help our customers go on the journey is to make sure they pick the right tools that can integrate well together via an API. It's not just about delivering digital products, it's about helping that transformation from a digital delivery perspective as well, as we think about those being process loops from understanding customer needs, getting better at doing that, and finding the voice of the customer within the organization. Today's webinar is reasons not to rebuild your website in 2025. But if that was the title, we could actually do this session for a good few days, because there are many reasons not to rebuild your website in 2025. And so there really have to be compelling reasons to go through this process. It's a little bit like if you're ever been through the process of moving home or renovating, it is something that an end destination is worth getting to, but sometimes the pain of getting there is just a lot. And sometimes we say that if the pain of getting there doesn't match up to the pain of the transition, then you don't do anything. And so it's only when a trigger is sufficient enough to get you to that point that you are motivated as an organization to go through this process. That is what today is about. It's about talking about what are those triggers that may motivate your organization to get to the point where 2025 is the point at which you need to rebuild your website. A couple of years ago, we did a webinar where we said, like, how much does a website cost? A website is this sort of very catch-all term for anything from a very tiny brochureware website for a local sandwich shop to something powering the largest FTSE 100, S&P 500 companies, and with many integrations. And so we're probably using that term website, and we're thinking about it being, for today at least, that global website, potentially also serving multiple regional websites as well, potentially also a logged in function ad. So the website being a very much a catch-all term for things that live on your presence, obviously your .com. So in terms of triggers, what might get you into the place where 2025 is the year to go through that rebuild, refresh process? The sort of two axes that we think about it: there's the internal factors and triggers, and the ambiguous versus unambiguous. From an internal perspective, that might be things like it's been decided that it's time for a brand refresh. But from an external perspective, it might be you've got this CMS that's going out of support and the particular version that you're on. And so then that is a trigger to then take action. And then on the ambiguous versus unambiguous, really that means how much potential argument is there about taking action. If it can be argued one way or the other quite easily whether this is the right way, that's still a valid trigger. But today we're going to focus a little bit more on the unambiguous triggers. Almost everyone in your organization can see the trigger and say, okay, the logical next step is that we have to rebuild. So if you're finding yourselves facing any of these triggers, then hopefully this session gives you some solace in terms of what to do next, and we're going to dig into it as we go through. We've summarized all of our experience working with companies as well as our experience in the wider market. These are the types of companies that have presence across multiple countries, 10 for example, but generally it's across into the double digits of regions. Revenue is generally in that kind of hundreds of millions, certainly into the billions. So lots of complexity. Digital is both a marketing engine for serving that revenue, as well as the commercial aspect of APM terminals. They're selling and taking truck appointments through that website. Wagamama taking orders through the website. So it's the digital presence is very much a part of the value creation in that organization. And for example, we're saying that this company Y, last rebuilt their global and country websites in 2019. When we're thinking about this session, 2019 almost feels like just yesterday. It's now 6 years ago. And we had a pandemic in the middle of that, so it doesn't feel quite as much as 6 years, but it is, in digital terms, a long time. It might be that your company refreshed perhaps in the pandemic, maybe slightly more recently in 2019, but you might be also starting to feel for the reasons we'll see with these triggers, some opportunity or at least growing pains as to why now is the time to build. So first of all, we're going to focus and talk about the CMS shelf life. So when you purchase a CMS, like anything in this world, there is a shelf life to it. We're going to look at the triggers. What's the cost of doing nothing? Identify some of the allies and stakeholders in this overall process for rebuilding 2020. Think about the three kind of main streams that have to get involved as part of that rebuild process. And then if this is a trigger you're facing, what are some immediate next steps you can take? So we're thinking about the CMS shelf life as a broader category. One of the things that some of our clients have seen in the last few years is that the version they are on is going out of support. Typically, a CMS vendor will put it into a form of support, and then it'll go into extended life support, and after that, it's no longer supported, which means that if there is a security vulnerability, it requires a patch on your own. These are just some quotes that we might be hearing company Y. We've just had an alert that our CMS vendor ends support next quarter. Typically, a CMS vendor will have a page on their website where they list all this out, keeping you in the loop. Perhaps your agency is keeping you in the loop as to the version support. And then the other side of it is that if you are going out to support, there are credentials that require your CMS to be fully supported, such as Cyber Essentials Plus requiring your CMS to be in full support. So if your CMS is reaching that end of life support, you're going to have to take action if you wish to maintain that credential. And in many cases, those credentials are key business drivers. But it might be that it's not actually the version you're on, but you've been on a contract coming up to 3 years. At that point, there's an opportunity to renew, and perhaps the pricing model at that vendor has changed. They might feel that you've got lock-in, or that there's increased value in the platform, and that's why they can justify keeping you on the old pricing. Now is a good time to open up the conversation about pricing. So that is always a chance to rethink. If now is the time, it's a chance to rethink staying with that CMS or that version is appropriate. In some cases, you would have heard aching pains from within the organization that the CMS actually is causing some material issues for the business. It's dropping, going down for various reasons. And in a more operational perspective, the kind of CMS backend is taking such a long time to load up a single page that the content editors are almost banging their heads against their desk. And given the timing of potentially at the end of your license agreement, or the fact that the version is going out of support, quite the time to rebuild. In this particular case, you might get the question, what about if we just do nothing? That depends on what the particular trigger is. It might be that you're going to continue to pile on technical debt into your platform. There's the reputational risk that if you keep going with this CMS, or this version of it at least, that you're going to be hurting your internal and crucially external perception, as well as the challenges with sort of the operational side of things. Good people want to work with good tools that work well. And from a material perspective, that your CMO would certainly be interested in is, and procurement, is that if the license cost is going up, something to be born, it's a chance to go out to the market and see whether you can find something with a price competitive, at least in line with your current budget plans. So in this process, you're going to have some allies. IT, they're going to know the platform's pain points, likely be key supporters. Probably the marketing team, content team, they'll also be a champion for a new CMS that can support them to deliver what they have to deliver. And then on the other side, convinced in this process that finance is going to need a clear plan, budget, and rationale as to how this change is going to be financially viable and what the return on investment is going to be. And crucially, particularly around the risks associated with an out-of-date CMS version, legal compliance will want to know as well, and what's happening. And will also potentially be key allies in supporting the rebuild to a later version of the CMS or indeed a new CMS. So in terms of those three key streams that will need to be delivered if 2025 is the year that you go through this process, necessarily build is something that has to happen, because if you're going to be upgrading to a new version, there's going to be some code work. If you're moving to a new CMS, you're going to have to rebuild and do that work. So the build component of it is going to be probably the biggest aspect of this piece, but there's also an opportunity for improvement on the content and design. You could just stick with the same exact content, the same exact design, and rebuild from back end, something that people can't see from behind the scenes, but there's an opportunity to refresh the content. And if you're moving to a new CMS, you may need to do that content migration anyway. Once you're doing that, you may think, okay, well, we're doing that, we might as well actually look at what we've got, decide what's actually creating value, what's creating clutter. Something else to consider is if you move to a new CMS, it will require that your staff get training. That's something to build into the project plan. If it's a new version of the same CMS, it's likely that they'll still, the won't have changed significantly, that there will be sort of wholesale training required. But if it's a new CMS, even simple processes will need training. If all of this is starting to feel a bit too real, what's the kind of next things we can do when we jump off this webinar? So first thing, you might have already done it whilst we were sitting here, is check the official support timelines. So how long before your CMS version is out of support or extended support? In the deck here, we've got a link to Cycle, but if you're on Drupal, Optimizely, Adobe, and any of the other vendors, they'll provide similar sorts of documentation. If you can't find it online, reach out to your account managers, or if you have an agency, reach out to your agency and get this information so you have a clear sense of what you have to do with. If you're on a SaaS version of a CMS, it might be that this question is no longer the chief concern because the SaaS system is upgrading behind the scenes. The other thing to think about is when your CMS license is up for renewal, if it's within 18 months, maybe it starts to start planning what options you have and begin those conversations about what to do next. And necessarily, if you're going to start engaging with finance, procurement, and the rest, then it's worth starting to look at what those cost savings could be, as well as indeed the cost to do this project, and begin those stakeholder conversations once loaded up with some of that data. So that was CMS, shelf life, but in another perhaps parallel universe, company-wide is facing a different trigger, which is a brand refresh. Somewhere within the organization, perhaps with some visibility, the team know that it's coming, but sometimes these things happen behind closed doors and then it's sprung upon you. A brand refresh, does that mean it's new fonts, new colors? Is it also new imagery, new tone of voice? All of those decisions, all of that gets loaded into a brand refresh, has cascading ramifications for what happens with the website. And of course, once that refresh is signed off by leadership, there is somewhat of an expectation that it could be on the website yesterday, but these things do not happen overnight. So what's the cost of doing nothing? On some touch points, they go, okay, we've got the brand refresh, we can update very quickly. Your website might start to look inconsistent with the other touch points within your business. Internal frustration of, well, we've got this new brand, but why are we not seeing it? Why is the outside world not able to see it, particularly on our website, which is our main front door for the phased approach to rolling out the brand refresh is pretty typical and expected when you've got a wide digital estate. Not updating the website at all is not an option. So it's pretty unambiguous about if the trigger is there, you've done a brand refresh, the website needs updating. So less needing to convince certain stakeholders. Okay, thinking about those three streams, content versus design versus build, necessarily, if there has been a change to the brand look and feel, design needs to change. It will require an update to the UI design, final user interface, the thing that users touch. It's important to keep the brand guardian, whoever has ownership over that brand refresh, in the loop, because you don't want to go too far down the line with your interpretation of those new brand guidelines and then find that you've made the changes and they go, that doesn't actually match what was intended from the brand guidelines. What we see sometimes is that brand guidelines, or in the brand refresh, has great breadth, really clear on the typography, new color sets, potentially even imagery, but the implementation and digital on the website isn't as clear. So there's scope for interpretation. And so where possible, as early as possible, as continuously as possible throughout that process, keep the brand guardian in the loop, not necessarily keep the only decision maker, but a decision maker in the process so that there isn't rework. If we're doing changes to the front end design, that's going to require implementation. That could just be a reskin if the back end can remain the same. But if the page architecture needs updating, or if all the content actually needs updating, because now we need fresh imagery of our products, a different style of illustration, the process can be more extensive. Even a tone of voice change that kind of opens a full can of worms. So that whole process is going to take a while. It's not just a quick look at paint. There's lots of scope in terms of how big this piece of string could be, but all of those need to be thought about as part of that brand refresh process. The next steps: what is the scale and scope of that refresh? Can the site be updated with just a few new fonts and colors, or does it require that wider scale redesign? Where are we in the stage of that refresh? Has it been fully signed off, so we've got something documented that we can work from? Or are we just at the stage where there's some early indications of it and it hasn't been signed off, so there might be flex? Because a brand refresh is a high visibility project that typically gets sign off, which can lead to delays, which can have sort of cascading impact on delivering that website. Okay, so we've talked about CMS shelf life, brand refresh. When you open that rebuild box, as you might now be needing to do in 2025, that one trigger could lead to thinking about a whole other set of opportunities. That CMS change then might go, oh, now actually is a good moment to have a brand refresh or updating our content. And so what started as a smaller thing, a bit like when you get builders in, and once the scaffolding is up, we might as well change something on the roof, or we need to change the windows. Once you've opened it, we might as well get it all done. And there's a bit of excitement and more people pile in. And so these things that could start as a smaller piece of work can snowball. So managing that process. So one of our customers, Argus Media, who are a global energy and commodity price benchmarks provider, went through a process just like that. We worked on their website started in 2018, launched in 2019, and then last year they went through a brand refresh. And then as part of refreshing the design, there was an opportunity to upgrade the CMS version because they were still on an older version. As technology has changed, headless architectures became a new relevant paradigm for them to consider, and they also migrated to headless architecture. We've got a clip here from a longer conversation with Gio, the VP of Marketing Operations, and we'll play that, and he talked about what triggered the brand refresh and then how they went about the project.
My name's Giovanni. I work here at Argus Media, VP of Marketing Operations. Been with the company about 18 months now. We started to embark on a brand refresh, and we need to deliver this brand refresh. We started looking at our technology, how we do this, and we decided to go headless because technology hadn't been touched for a while. We didn't want to move away from Sitecore, and Sitecore is a good platform. It was a big step for us. It's quite a big site. We have a lot of content. We have three main streams. One is our news. We have content coming from the editorial, but also we have the marketing content. In total, the project with the brand refresh for a year, but the actual development and getting the site up and running for about 4 months. The brand refresh, that determined a lot of the requirements and direction. The site's big, and we probably underestimated the time we needed to migrate content, but we got there. It was a big push, but we got there. Having this new website has started us on the path of digital transformation. We can now showcase our content in the right way. So the business is extremely happy. Our leadership happy. We've got a refreshed brand, been delivered. The site looks really good. We're driving more traffic to the site. People spending more time on it.
I think this is a really good example of a company going through that exact process where there was a trigger and then another opportunity combined to deliver compounding value to the business. They're able to refresh the brand, the look and feel, as well as make a technology transition that sets them well up for the future. And the conversation around the headless architecture we cover in a separate webinar, and there's the full interview with Gio. So if that's of interest, we can also share that. Very interesting as a broader topic to think about your headless CMS architecture as part of your broader composable digital stack. So the real world is very much that company thinking about why they had that rebrand, potentially then they updated the website, company Y merges with company Z. And so now we've got a whole set of other opportunities, but really a merger represents all of the typical triggers of needing to build a website. It's relatively unambiguous that you need a new website. What typically happens in a merger is that the new combined team had to work very quickly to get that new holding website just in time for the announcement of the merger, so that everyone, they read the news, they see the PR news will flash, it goes on Bloomberg terminals, and they can see some version of what the new combined brand will look like. But of course, this is just a holding page. Maybe it's 10 pages that reflect some aspect of the new brand. And we probably see the merger being one of the most common triggers for us getting involved with organizations, but they also come with their own challenges. The world knows about that new combined brand, but not But the real consolidation or synergy, as it's all the value that kind of goes up into making that merger and the plan of that merger, that's when the real work starts to happen. The tick is very much clocking. This process is really about making the two become one. So from a content perspective, really the content is actually surprisingly, because I think sometimes it's definitely, as Gio said, underestimated. That content is where the biggest work happens. And from our experience, content is one of the most common reasons why a website launch is delayed. There's a sort of underestimation of the amount of work that goes into it. Typically, there is just a need to join up that thread about what content needs to go into this new site. When you're combining two global websites into one, you may have thousands of pages, some with quite a lot of overlap, some, if combined directly, crudely into one website, would be cannibalizing each other. And so that's where the real work needs to happen in terms of combining those two websites, so that SEO value is not only maintained but also improved. And that also requires a very careful 301 redirect plan as well. So as part of that build, we have to build a new website. It's possible that, depending on the scenario, one of the two companies' CMS could be used and inherited by the combined brand. It might still be that there's a bit of a brand refresh, there's some content that needs to get migrated. But in this scenario, let's assume the company YZ needs a new CMS, so that has to be selected. Possibly that new CMS is going to be new to one of the organizations, and it's going to have to be in that combined organization, training is going to have to take place. That probably is closer to the go live point. But as part of building this new website, there's going to be integrations into multiple backends. What we generally see from a timing perspective, the website is one of those kind of first leading edge projects for a merger. So we have to integrate into multiple backend systems that are somewhat, and over time, those backend systems do get synthesized and consolidated, and then subsequently we integrate into just one of them. There is extra work required in this process to keep those timelines of getting the new merged brand website live. And then design, obviously a critical component, and requires the brand guidelines to be ready for the combined organizations, as well as all of that content. What are the different page templates? What is the information architecture? The design has to follow that, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of rework. One thing to say here that we've seen is that the governance process around design is incredibly important. It's always important, but it's incredibly important in a new merged organization, because design is, by its very nature, subjective. And so you need to have a process in place for who gets to sign off, who, be it singular or plural, are involved in the sign-off process for the design. None of this is mentioning the orphan and rogue sites that exist in both of these organizations. The sort of orphan sites being something that has been created in a region, but it doesn't sit on their main platform, or might be a specific product that sits on a separate platform that's been built up. But both organizations have the intention over time to roll those orphan or rogue sites into their main platform. They haven't done that yet. That will come, but initially we're just focusing on getting that yz.com website in place. Given the timelines for this type of process, things are happening in parallel. It's important that you're locked in to the progress of the new brand identity project, as well as its timelines, so that design and the content can be staged appropriately to avoid rework, and that we can keep up with the speed of the expected timelines to deliver the website. From our side, or at least from the content side, the content audit and consolidation has to start as soon as possible. Starting with that high-level content audit, there are great tools to do that. Anything from Visual Sitemap, which gives you an incredible breadth view, screenshots of every single page that exists on your website in a spider diagram, to tools like SEMrush and Search, and where you can see all the pages, the content score, as well as, of course, using your analytics tools as well to start to see the value. And pages potentially where there's overlap from a keyword and SEO perspective, as well as which pages just have no business value, get no traffic, and don't need to be merged. Working towards that target information architecture. And then from a technical perspective, beginning the process to work on that. What is the technical strategy and architecture for the new combined entity? What are the integrations? What is the CMS going to be? That's a whole process in and of itself. What is the infrastructure and all the other tools that exist in your composable stack? Get procurement involved as early as possible. Naturally, you want them to have visibility and get involved as soon as possible. It's 2025. There are many reasons not to rebuild, because rebuilding is a process. That's certainly more work than just the typical BAU, but there are definitely reasons to rebuild in 2025. And if any of the triggers we've mentioned or posted about resonate, then hopefully today has been useful in giving you space to think about what to do next. seen some scars, some battle wounds that have been won in terms of being able to deliver sites based on that starting point, that trigger. Next section here, we'll send a summary of the notes from today's session. And if it's of interest, we can also share access to the full Argus Media case study on their brand refresh, rebuild, and headless transition, as well as some other case studies for relevant projects. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you soon.